Supposed biblical error. Do gold and silver rust? James 5:3 says, "Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days." The problem is gold and silver do not rust or corrode, but James used a Greek word that refers to something rusting. So it appears James did not understand that certain metals would not rust. But the problem with this objection is one is assuming James was attempting to make a scientific fact and not a theological point. This should be clear, since he used the perfect tense in all three clauses, which suggests that their wealth was already in some state of decay, which would have been obviously false for his immediate readers. The rich still had money and garments. James is most likely making a theological point that earthly riches do no one good if they're not seeking God or taking care of the poor and hired workers. Furthermore, the second half of the verse says the corrosion will eat your flesh like fire. No one thought corroded metals would literally eat one's flesh. Given this is obviously metaphorical, the rest of the verse likely is as well, so James could make a theological point. Additionally, in the Septuagint, we see the same Greek word being used metaphorically, so there was already a precedent set that one could speak of something rusting or corroding without being literal. Douglas Moo said, "To be sure, a literal interpretation would restrict James' reference to those possessions that are capable of rotting, but the occurrences of the verb in the Septuagint does not occur elsewhere in the New Testament, show that it can be applied metaphorically to anything that is transitory. A few commentators think that James, because of his lower class origins, might simply be ignorant about the properties of gold and silver, but in fact rust was already being attributed to silver and gold. The word seems to have taken on a general sense of decay. Together then, the three clauses in verse 2 and verse 3a remind the rich people, whom James condemns, that the money and material possessions in which they place so much stock will not last. A common misconception many seem to have is that the Bible is always literal, when in fact it uses metaphors, figures of speech, and hyperbole, just as anyone today would in a written work. If I said I was wasting away, you would obviously not take that literally. You would understand I was just hungry. Even today, we use our term for rust in metaphorical ways. If I said my shooting hand was a bit rusty, you would realize I haven't been to the range in a while, not that my hand was literally developing rust. If we heard someone say their family's wealth rotted away, we would obviously understand that metaphorically, not that someone left bags of cash out exposed to the elements, which caused the bills to decompose somehow. James is using the language of his day to speak in a similar way. Their gold and silver will be useless for the day of judgment, where they will have to stand on merit and not wealth. The point is, material wealth is unreliable. Their riches have already lost their value in the sight of God, as if they've rotted away. Craig Blomberg and Miriam J. Kamel say, "The image may be deliberately jarring, and all the more powerful if it reflects the metaphorical meaning of becoming useless. In other words, not even the gold, which the rich think they can count on to save them and provide them with the security of wealth, will last to safeguard them." The word rust also proves intriguing, because it can mean both rust and poison or venom. In some ways, the latter definition fits better with the flesh-eating fire of the second half of the verse. Either way, James' declaration sags under the weight of waste. These people have retained so much unused wealth that even the untarnishable has tarnished in God's eyes, and this waste testifies against them. Unused wealth does the kingdom no good and condemns those who refuse to use it for God. So James is not saying gold and silver naturally rust. That is being uncharitable with the text. He is obviously using jarring language to make a theological point about how material wealth is worthless in the eyes of God, and it is especially bad if you're not sharing your wealth with those who need it. Thus, this supposed error can be resolved.